Hello, my name is Cami and welcome to my channel Tidbits. Today I want to show you how I create digital design boards, which help me immensely in the planning stage of designing a room. It's really easy, it's incredibly fun, and I can't wait to teach you how. Now I'm going to walk you from start to finish in the process that I used to create this design board, which is one of the three I just recently made when I was challenged by one of my blog sponsors, Blanco Sinks, to create these mood boards. Now they recently released this new Icon 33-inch low divide sink, which is made out of their super durable sil granite material. This beautiful wide farmhouse sink comes in several neutral colors, and they challenged me to design a board that highlighted the different looks that you could create in your home with one of their sinks. Now I won't go into any more detail on that in this video, but if you'd like to hear more about the sinks or take a look at the other design boards that I created using the same methods I'm going to teach you today, I will leave a link to that blog post in the description below. But first, let's go over the software that I used for these design boards, and pretty much all my graphic design projects really. I use Adobe Photoshop Elements, which I'll link below. It's a much more affordable and what I like to call a dumbed down version of Photoshop CC. The full Photoshop CC is pretty overwhelming, and in my experience it takes like a class or a course to really understand all that it can do. Whereas Photoshop Elements is very intuitive, yet very powerful. I honestly suggest to everyone that it's a program worth getting no matter what you do. There are a lot of free or subscription-based digital design programs on the web for all levels, Canva, PicMonkey, just to name a few. You can also work inside of a Google Doc to create digital design, but it has been my experience that these programs are frustrating. They don't really give you a whole lot of creative control. I use Photoshop Elements to throw together like kids' birthday party invitations or chore charts or flyers. I make my pin graphics for my blogs, memes, Instagram posts with collages or text, and I even used Elements to create our Instant Pot cookbook. I use really the most basic functions, but it's still so very powerful. I do not use it to edit my photos. You can, but nothing is as good as Photoshop Lightroom, in my opinion. If you have any more questions about Photoshop Elements, please feel free to ask them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to get back with you. But for now, let's jump right into creating the design board, which I like to call earthy tones, to highlight the concrete gray Blanco sink. Okay, with your project in mind, you're first going to want to gather some images to use in your design board. So I'll often do just like a Google image search, or maybe I have a certain product in mind and where I could find that. Here's an example of the tile that I use in this design board. I look for the images that are pretty flat rather than tilted, and I prefer images that are standalone versus ones that are in a room if I can find them. So that's one image, and then I also look on Etsy for some images. Here's one with the plates, and again I choose this flat lay one versus a tilted one. It just looks a little bit better on the design boards in most cases. Here's an example of a photo that I would use. Now you have to be careful when you're picking an actual photo that you're not actually going to pull the element out of. You want to make sure that all the elements in the photo will go with the elements that you plan to put in your design board or your space, just so that it looks really cohesive and gives you a really good idea of the textures and colors that you'll be pulling together in the room. Here's an example of a pennant that I wanted to put in my design board. You can see here I have an option of the pennant on a white background, or there's several different backgrounds to choose from. Now I would definitely go for this white background image, and what I would do, I would just click on it and then right click, save image as, and then I would name it what I wanted and save it in the folder where I would go to find it. Just a few other things with what kind of images to look for. I like to find ones that are either clear cut on the edges that I can easily crop out any extra white space, or like this one, if it has a background, the element that I actually want in the design board has a really clean line. And you'll see what I can do with these images and Photoshop elements that makes this really important to notice. Something where the image is, or the element in the image is high contrast as compared to the background. It'll make your life easier as you go to put them inside of the board. So that's just a few instructions on how to get your images for your project. Okay, now we're going to open up Photoshop Elements, and down here is the photo bin, and I'm gonna basically upload all the photos that I want to use to create this board. Now this is the finished board just for reference, but let's go ahead and File, Open, and find all the images that I want to use for this particular board. And I'm gonna go ahead and select them all that I've compiled inside of this board. And they will show up in this photo bin as soon as they're done loading, and I'll just be able to pull from them directly from here. Okay, then the next step is to create your new file where you will actually design the board. So you can go to File, New, Blank File, and then you're going to want to make sure that you have the right information here. Now I'm going to do a custom size, and it's in pixels, and the standard size I usually do is 24 wide by 36 long, and you want to make sure that your resolution is 300. And then I can name it Earthy Tones Design Board. And I'm just checking everything. Color's good, background white. The background, you definitely want a white background, because as we talked about, a lot of these images that you pull in have a crisp white background, so that'll make it look a lot better. And then I can go ahead and create that. And here is my empty file ready to throw the images in. Okay, then the next step is just to start layering in your images. Now I know that they wanted me to work with this image for the concrete gray sink, but I'm definitely gonna crop that out a little bit because a lot of these elements in the background aren't necessarily related to how I want the mood board to feel. So I can go ahead and grab the crop tool, and it will try to do an automatic thing, which I just exit out of. And then I'm going to just crop around this sink. I'm trying to get in some of that brown, some of the black, some of the white, and leaving out a little bit of the other details. So that's my image that I'm left with. And I can go and find the file, the empty file we created, and drag that image right in there and move that in its place. I can mess with the size. Since this is kind of the main image, I am gonna make it a little bit bigger so that it's a big part of the design board. Then I'm just gonna go ahead and start dragging and dropping in a few of the images, and I like to pull in the photos first because they don't have the white background, so it's a little easier to work with the elements that have the white background rather than the photos last. So I like to pull in the photos. This photo that I pulled in to show some art that could go on this design board, I don't want all this extra white space. So I can either crop out the white space, or what I prefer is just to get my crop tool, drag it through, and then I'm just left with the image that I actually want inside the mood board. So now I can just drag that in there and move that into a place where I feel it might be. Nothing is really permanent at this point. I'm just throwing in the elements so I can rework them as we go. So here's a nice image of an apron that I wanted to pull in this design board. Again, I'm going to just crop the part that I want and get really the color and the elements that I want for the design board. Okay, so I've got a nice little stack of photos here and a lot more white space to work with. So I just go through my images and start playing around. This is the background tile that I wanted to use. And again, I'm just going to crop it so that I don't have this white space in the way of the image. It's just nice to not have that taking up the layers to where it complicates what can go in front or behind. So just clean up the image as much as you can before you throw it in. Okay, you may or may not know, but Photoshop works in layers. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see where all your layers are, and basically the top layers are the top of the pile, and then anything behind it is actually behind that element. So if you throw in an image, for example, I want to throw in this one right here, but it's being thrown in behind this tile, and I actually want it to come in the front, so I can just come over here to the side, drag that up, and you can see here it just popped right into the front, and I can resize it and get it right into the spot I want. So that's how Photoshop works. A lot like all graphic design programs, it's in layers, and you just have to kind of work through them and put the ones you want in the forefront. But I will say this method is a lot easier than like the Google Docs where you have to move it forward. This is just so much easier. Things don't shift around when you add them, and it just makes your job a whole lot easier. Okay, now I'm going to show you a really cool tool that a lot of the other programs don't have. Now here's a cutting board, a rustic cutting board that I wanted to show some kind of rustic wood into the design board. The problem is if I throw this in with the white background that is actually a little bit creamy, it will just kind of awkwardly, here I'll just show you, it will awkwardly stack over things, and just moving it back and forth won't really work. So let's delete that. What I'm actually going to do is basically cut out this cutting board, and this is why it comes in handy if you have a really high contrast item against a really light background. So I use this tool called the Quick Selection tool, and you can see here the cursor is that size, and I can use the bracket bar to make it bigger. I usually stick it around there unless I'm getting really fine-tuned, but I use this in the most basic, easy function. If images like, say, this plant, I would not mess with this. That would be way too hard. So I only mess with this if it's something that basically Photoshop does pretty automatically. So here's my quick selection tool selected, and I can just run this, and it does kind of the what are they called, marching ants, and it automatically saw that contrast and selected the item without the background. And then I just hit layer mask, and hit reveal selection. And what you can see now is this image is on a transparent background, and then that will make stacking it into the graphic a whole lot easier, because that creamy background is no longer there. So I think I'll actually turn this on the side, shrink it down a little bit, and just have it layered in with those other images, shift things around, play around with it. But so that's when that tool really comes in handy, when you want to take away the background and layer it a little better inside of your design board. I'm going to do the same here with these plates. It might be a little trickier because this edge is not as clearly defined as this background, but let's just see how smart this program is. Hold the black really well. I'm just slowly moving it through my image. Okay, so I can't tell, I don't know if you can see, but these marching ants kind of came up here, and didn't quite get this plate. So what I can do is down here, there's this, you can switch it to subtract or add. And I'm gonna subtract because I got it outside of the border of the plates. Now I'm gonna make that icon smaller and I just slowly moved and clicked over there, and you can see it just grabbed right along the edge. Now this one I don't want to subtract because it didn't catch this border. So I'm going to add and just slowly guide that line. And there we have it. Layer mask, reveal selection, and it pulled it perfectly out of the background. And now I can add those plates right into the board and move them around and layer them a lot easier. So I think I'd like it above those elements, just like that. And I've already done the quick selection for these bowls. A lot of times it might try to grab several elements, and you might need to use your arrow buttons to kind of shift that element out. So if you lose it, like I just did behind these elements, you can go and find right there. And again, I'm just gonna inch it out, because every time I go to grab it, I'm actually grabbing the elements that are on top. So here I see it peeking out, and then I can kind of grab it and put it where I want. Shift that back in place and just play around with your graphic until it's exactly how you want it. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. There's one last thing I'm gonna do inside of here. This is your color selection tool. You can actually click on these colors and choose, or you can click down here. There's always the black and white right there. Now I like to grab this rectangle tool. Now if I were to just save this as it is, you'll see the white background is just all white. And so if you're throwing it on the web, you may not be able to see the border of the image. So I like to just make a little border along the outside of the edges, so that when I save it, this image actually has a border and can be distinguished from the white space on the web. That one is a little thick, so I'm just nudging it over. And then finally, we'll do the one, oh, there we go, on the bottom. Okay, there it is, my finished design board. Now I'm going to show you really quickly how to save this. You just go to File. First thing I always do is I save as. Now it's important to note the format you're going to save it, and where you're going to save it, and what you name it. So I want this to be with all my other boards. Finished board file for the video, and I'm just going to call it Earthy Tones, and then I'm going to do PSE to note that this is the Photoshop Elements file. You'll see this .psd. That means that this file is keeping all these layers intact. So if you save it and you realize you messed something up, you can always pull open the Photoshop element file with all the layers and fix it there. If you flatten it into a JPEG, you cannot fix these layers. So I always first save the Photoshop file just to make sure I have that. I've clicked layers and all that good stuff. Click save. Then I'm going to go to save for web, and I'm going to save two files this way. Now this original one is 2400 pixels wide, and I'm going to save it just like this and call it high res. Basically, this is the biggest this file can get based on how I set it up at first. And if, say, the brand wants a bigger image, or I just need to have a bigger image, I always have that. So I always save a bigger file. And then finally, I'm going to do save for web again. And this time I'm going to make it 1200 pixels wide, which is the width of the files that I use on my website. So that might be different for you, but here's where you can fix the width for how you want it on the web. And I'm going to call that web, just so when I go to grab that image, I can distinguish between the two. And there you have it. Let's pull it up and see how it looks outside of Photoshop. I'll pull up the high res. Here we go. There is my design board, and I can go ahead and put these into my blog post or my project or wherever it needs to be. All right, I hope you enjoyed watching this mood board come together in Photoshop Elements. I've been asked how to do this for years, so it's good to finally have some direction posted for that. I'd love for you to head to my blog post linked below to get a close look at my other boards. And I'll go ahead and leave some links to other blog posts that I've done where I've created design boards in preparation for designing one of our spaces. Like I mentioned, it really helps to just bring all the elements together visually so that you can make the best design decisions to help you end up with a very cohesive space in real life. I'll be making some for my living room and master bathroom soon, so stay tuned for that. If you love the do-it-yourself life, I think you'll love my YouTube channel and my blog. Please subscribe and come back soon. Thank you so much for watching.